Hi, I'm your host, Marlo Lemon, and you're listening to Wild Voice, the podcast where I take this voice of mine and share my wild journey with you. Being widowed at 34 with a 15-month-old, most would see as life ending. And instead, I alchemized it and put life back together, and it became more beautiful and fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. Through this life shift of mine, I realized who I am and what I'm here to do. I'm an intuitive energy healer, and sharing how I view the world is how I help you upgrade your life and alchemize your journey into magic. From day one, I wanted to share my journey, call it intuition, but I knew it was going to do more good out in the world than keeping it to myself. So when I say I've mastered life, that doesn't mean I'm perfect or that life is. I mean, I've mastered the concept of life, and I want to share that with you. So I pulled up to my parents' house, and as I did, our conversation continued. As Bob opened up to me more about his concerns, I reassured him that we'd figure this out. Something that works for everyone and makes everyone feel comfortable. I told him my dad was pretty upset, and now this was only from what I had heard from my mom, since him and I hadn't talked since he had been out of town. I knew with this new information, he wasn't too happy with it. I mentioned that I knew how the conversation between him and my dad went, and that my dad asked for the truth, and obviously didn't get it. I said, with Easter coming up, we'll see what our options are, and he agreed. Then I got quiet for a minute, and he said, I know you don't give a shit, but I just want to thank you for being there and listening. And he started to get choked up. I had spent the last 10 days making Bob feel like all I did was give a shit. I did nothing but care, and I was reconfirming that when he would ask and with every action. So hearing this, again, I chose to hold back, confirming, again, all the ways that I cared. Obviously I cared. I probably cared too much. Just then, my parents' front door swung open and there was Nash, standing there with a dinosaur face mask beanie thing on his head and waddling outside. I laughed out loud. I told Bob he was coming outside and that I'd take some pictures. As that happened, I could hear Bob's reverse sensors beeping in his truck. I figured that meant he had gotten to his appointment and was parking. I told him Nash had come out and I needed to go. And I so badly wanted to tell him to call me later after his appointment and tell me how it went. Or to tell him that I loved him. But I knew I had to stop caring as much. I needed to change our relationship. And for my own heart, quickly. And this was already hard enough. I needed to create space for myself. So I said, have a good appointment. And then it was quiet again. I then wanted to say, talk to you later, but for some reason that felt weird too. So we both just said goodbye and hung up the phone. I quickly jumped out of the car and scooped up Nash. I took a picture of him and made our way inside. I sat on my parents' kitchen floor with him, keeping him from trying to open the freezer to hit the ice cream jackpot, and I sat him on my lap. I opened up my phone and took a double chin selfie of him and sent both of those pictures I had taken to Bob. As I sent those, I thought maybe co-parenting would be easier. At the end of the day, as a parent, all you want is a healthy, happy home, and to share raising your kid with someone who cares and loves them as much as you do, and wants to hear and see the little things and be there for the tough times, and a support for everything in between. And that was Bob. Our relationship now wasn't important anymore. What was important is how we were going to work together to raise Nash. A healer told me once, our job as parents is to love them and to show up. And it doesn't have to be to everything, but enough that they know that you're there for them. That's it. The thought crossed my mind a time or two about the three of us living in the same house, but different rooms. Bob would probably need help with his treatments. We could still, help each other raise Nash as we figured out what our new normal was going to be. And most likely that would save us money. At the time, what I didn't realize is not once did I check in with me. What did I truly want? What would be best for me? Yeah, I liked the idea, or I wouldn't have thought it. But deep down, I think it was from a space of being scared of the unknown and not wanting to let go of Bob completely and the family we had created. I wanted a family unit for Nash, and I didn't want to lose Bob. I still cared about him immensely as a person, as my friend, as the person that I had Nash with. Nash and I made our way up to the apartment to play, and life felt a little easier for a second. Things felt like they were shifting into a good place. About 45 minutes had gone by, about the length of his appointment, and I got a text back from Bob. It would be the last text I'd ever get from him. And he said, "He's so cute. Thank you for sending." He was talking about the pictures I sent of Nash. I smiled and also was sad. I think a piece of me hoped he'd just tell me about his appointment without me asking. But he didn't. I wanted to ask how it went, and instead I just put my phone down. Life was for sure different in every way. Shortly after, my mom came up to the apartment and found us. It was about 7 p.m. now, and she said she was going to run a couple errands and wanted to see if she could take Nash with her. I jumped at the idea. One, Nash had never really gone with someone on a whim before, and I liked the idea of that. And now this meant I could finally go back to the house and get my blender. It was a foreign feeling to me to have people be able to help me with Nash without him needing anything from me. So we made our way downstairs and got Nash loaded in the car. And then my mom turned to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I almost forgot. I talked to Angie today." She was eager to fill me in. Angie is an intuitive tarot card reader that my sister introduced us to. My mom had worked with her before, so I had heard of her. You'll hear an episode Angie and I do together, and we talk about this day. She proceeded to tell me she talked to Angie about my situation and asked about Bob and my future. Angie told my mom Bob would get better, but she saw him alone. She saw him never remarrying or being with anyone else. My mom lit up as she talked about me. Angie told her I was coming into my own, and that in about 6 months, life was going to change drastically. And that my soulmate and the person meant to help me raise Nash was coming in soon. And 3 years was when things would get really clear. She also said I would finally get that person that would take care of me and Nash, and we'd travel. We'd have the fun life that I hadn't been able to live yet. A life that had an ease to it in all the ways and an amazing love story. And that besides Nash was my true love. I loved everything I heard and was taking any fun piece of information I could get at this point. It also confirmed how I felt after my conversation with Bob, that we were all going to be okay. As we both walked to our cars, my mom stopped me. "Do you think that's such a good idea that you go over there? It's getting late, and your dad will be home later. Why don't you just wait and he can go with you?" I smiled at her and very confidently told her I just wanted to get it done, and that it's Bob, and that we just had a great conversation. She was reluctant, but as she started to get into her car and I was getting into mine, I yelled to her, "If he's there, I'll just come back." And she smiled, and we both shut our car doors and left. I decided to bring our dog Alvin. His crate lived in my car because he went everywhere we did, and since having Nash, Alvin didn't get much attention. So we went on our blender pickup adventure together. I had the music playing, the windows down, and I felt a sense of freedom. Freedom from the heaviness, freedom for being able to be out on my own while someone helped me with Nash. It was a new feeling that I had missed. I pulled onto our street, and as I made my way closer to our house, I could see Bob's truck was parked out front. We never parked out front. I got butterflies, and I wasn't sure why. Maybe nerves, maybe anxious to see him and see how this would go, maybe because his mom was probably there and I wasn't sure how that was going to go. I had worked out earlier that day and was still in workout clothes with a messy bun on top of my head. Now, I knew we were done, but for some reason, I still wanted him to think I was attractive. Silly, right? The guy was sleeping with men. But there was still this feeling that I wanted him to know what he gave up on. Or maybe it was just a natural instinct that kicks in, and with something like betrayal. Either way, my brain hadn't caught up that I didn't want him back. This was not the life that I deserved. I deserved someone that was really going to love me for me. I drove past our house and pulled into the church parking lot that was right next door to us. I parked out of view and was curious if they saw me drive by. I sat there for a minute, remembering what I had said to my mom, that I would leave if he was there. I contemplated leaving. As I sat there, I realized how silly that was. This was Bob. Like my Bob. And we just had the best conversation. So I pulled down the visor mirror and tried to fix myself up as much as I could, which meant I brushed away the flyaways on my messy bun, threw on some chapstick, and decided I was finally as ready as I'd ever be. We always parked in our driveway in front of our garage because that's where we entered the house. And our house was older, so we had to manually lift our garage door, a project we had on the mile-long list of house to-dos. Besides the pain of having to always get out of the car to open the garage, the only way we could lock it was from the inside. So a lot of the times it was unlocked. Anticipating that, I pulled into the driveway and just took a deep breath. I wondered if they were watching me from the window, curious probably what I was doing there. And I figured they were doing house stuff and maybe they could use some help. I got out to open the garage and I tugged on it hard and realized it was locked. A little embarrassed, thinking they might have been watching me struggle this whole time, I went back to the car to get Alvin out. He knew Bob's truck and he knew our house, and he was extremely excited we were there. He hadn't seen Bob in a couple days, which was abnormal for him. For all of us, actually. And Alvin was cry barking, which was so ridiculously loud it was laughable. And there wasn't a lot that got me to laugh these days. I thought to myself in that moment, well, maybe Bob can take Alvin. I knew that didn't make up for not seeing Nash. I just knew maybe it would help his heart a bit. I let Alvin out into the yard and he ran faster than I'd ever seen him move. At 13 years old, it took a lot these days to get him to move quick. And I had to walk around the front, and as I came to the front of the house where Bob's truck was parked, I opened our gate and I noticed it was parked a little crooked. Almost like he pulled in quickly. So I thought, well, maybe he's just running in to grab something. And I went to walk through our gate and noticed our front door was open, with our screen door closed. And I got up to the screen door, and here Alvin now was crying at the screen door, and before I could even swing it all the way open, Alvin was pushing his way through with his nose and bolted into the house. I stepped in and noticed lights were on, and our house looked cozy. Bob and his mom had done a nice job. It was staged nicely, no clutter, no toys scattered all over, and fresh flowers from our yard in a vase on the coffee table. It looked like a happy home. A home a new family would get to enjoy. I started saying hello as I looked around, but didn't hear anything back. I glanced in the backyard from our living room, our double doors, and I didn't see them out there either. I kept walking through the house and made my way to our dining room, where my blender lived. I grabbed it off the counter and almost laughed to myself, making sure I was not going to leave that house one more time without it. I kept making my way through the house, and I was looking around like I didn't know it. Like everything was reminding me already of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never was. As I walked through the kitchen, I could see the entrance door to the garage was open and the light was on in the garage. When I'd grabbed the blender, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Alvin dart in there and hadn't seen him come back out. So I figured Alvin had found them. Probably, most likely, cleaning up or organizing the chaos of suitcases and laundry in there. And as I made my way closer, I kept saying hello, but still wasn't hearing anything back. Our garage was set a bit lower than the rest of our house, so as I walked up to the door, I had to step down. I had to step down onto a step. And as my gaze took in the garage, there he was. The first thing that caught my attention was his right hand. I was looking at it from the side. It had a rosary wrapped around it, one that I had gotten when I was in Italy years before. Then I noticed his shoes, and then Alvin. Alvin was on his hind legs, crying and scratching at Bob's feet with his front paws, like he was baffled why Bob wasn't acknowledging him or picking him up. Then my attention went to his face and body. It was lifeless. This all happening in a matter of seconds. Then my brain caught up and I froze. Bob had killed himself. He had hung himself in our garage, from the garage door track with rope. And he was wearing what I assumed was what he wore to work that day. I couldn't piece together what I was looking at. It didn't feel real. I felt like I was looking at a movie prop. And so I was seeing him from the side, about 6 feet in front of me. I stepped into the garage more to lean in to look at him from the front. Is this really happening? Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? I called out to Bob like I wanted him to be playing the worst joke on me and hoping I wasn't seeing it right. But I was. It was real. He was lifeless with his eyes closed, and I felt like I was looking at a monster. Pure evil. A murderer. It was like I was looking at Bob, but that wasn't him. The air left the room, and at the same time it felt heavy and dark. I dropped the blender, and as it fell to the ground, I turned to run out of the house, and everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I didn't have my phone. I knew I needed it. I needed help. Maybe he was still going to be okay. Maybe someone could fix this. As I turned to run, I thought something to myself that I will remember always. I am never going to be the same again. When I thought that in that moment, it was out of fear. I was scared for my future, which also meant Nash's. I knew this wasn't something normal people see and come out the other side of. I knew people could get fucked up for a lifetime on a lot less. And how was I going to do this alone? I couldn't even cut Nash's fingernails without Bob's help. As I ran out of the house, I was screaming at the top of my lungs for Alvin. I wanted him out of there, and I knew I couldn't go back. I ran out the front door and around the side of the house, and I felt like I was in a movie. It didn't feel real. I felt like crying, but no tears were coming out. I made my way back to my car and flung open the door to grab my phone. And I had it in my hand and ran back to the front door of the house and stood out on the porch. I was dialing as I was running, and I had the phone to my ear while I was yelling for Alvin. Still screaming for him to come out, like it would happen to him if he stayed in there any longer. He finally came trotting to the screen door like he didn't have a care in the world. I flung the screen door open to let him out, and at the same time I heard Bob's voice on the phone. The fuck? His voicemail had picked up. So fucking confused, I looked at my phone and saw I had called him instead of 911. He was the person I would call for anything, good or bad. And here, the worst thing happened, and like on autopilot, I called him. But it was about him. I hung up quick and dialed 911. Everything about Bob scared me in that moment. His name, his voice, the idea of him. I didn't even know that person. I had no clue he was capable of something like that. Even with our conversations, it never even crossed my mind. I felt confused. I felt dumb. And I couldn't figure out how I missed this too. The 911 operator answered, and I quickly got the words out to explain what I had found. I was pacing outside at this point. Now that I had Alvin, I was standing as far away from the door as possible. Like I was going to catch what had happened in there, or he was going to come back from the dead and come walking out. She kept telling me someone was on their way, but asking me questions. Then she told me to go back in. The panic up-leveled. I told her I couldn't, and she fought back with me like there was no other option. And I was panicking and hyperventilating as I kept defending the fact that I couldn't follow her orders. I couldn't imagine putting myself back in there. She was adamant I needed to go back in and cut him down. Everything she was saying was making me panic even more, and I begged her to please not make me go back in there. I couldn't even imagine rummaging in the garage as Bob hung there, to find something to cut the rope, and if I did, how would I even get him down without him falling on me? Or what happens to a body when someone dies? I was scared of every possibility, and the fact I was already fucked up and knew I'd be even more fucked up if I went back in. And I had Nash to think about. I was all he had now, and I needed to try and be the least fucked up as possible. I kept trying to get off the phone with her, and I told her I needed to call my dad. I knew my mom had Nash, and I didn't want to panic her because she was driving with him. So it was my dad. She wouldn't let me get off the phone, so finally, when I heard sirens, I told her I was hanging up. I called my dad, and he immediately answered. Hyperventilating, I told him. He asked where I was, and as he was asking questions, a police officer pulled up with sirens blaring. He shoved the car in park and ran out, and I pointed and told him Bob was inside. And he ran in. As I was trying to talk to my dad, everything around me was getting loud. Visually and what I was hearing, an ambulance pulled up and people started filing out. To create more space, and as people showed up, I went to put Alvin back in the car and stood there as I was trying to explain to my dad what was happening. All of a sudden, it got quiet now, and it felt like everything was moving slow. I saw blue and red lights flashing, reflecting off of the house, and it was bright. I saw an older bearded man with a clipboard start walking towards me. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. He had come with the EMTs, and as he walked closer to me, I told my dad I had to go. Nothing was getting my full attention. Some of the EMTs ran into the house, and others came around the side trying to kick down the side door to get into the garage. I was watching all of this happening behind the bearded clipboard man, and I was just standing there watching my life fall apart while people that didn't even know me were trying to pick up the pieces. And I was so confused. My rack of baking supplies was blocking the side door inside the garage, so before I could yell to them to let them know, the bearded man started asking me questions and I could hear again. And as I was trying to focus, out of the corner of my eye, I saw my dad's truck pull up. He got out and started walking towards me. He put his arm around me and started walking me to the passenger side of his truck. As we were walking there, I told him I was worried about Alvin, so he got me to his car and went back to grab Alvin. While I was sitting there, I saw a fire truck pull up, and they were driving by slowly. Like they were looking for someone to give them the wave. Like if they needed to stop or to keep going. I looked over to where they were looking, and it was our front door, and I saw the police officer standing in it. He looked at them and shook his head. My stomach dropped. He was gone. He was so gone it wasn't even worth them stopping to come in. The firefighter nodded and they kept driving. Was he really dead? Was I really seeing all of this right? The police officer scanned the front yard and spotted me and started walking towards us. As he stepped out the front door, EMTs with their bags were following close behind him. No one was moving like there was a life to save. He really was gone. I panicked, thinking the next thing I would see would be them bringing Bob out. I anxiously repeated to my dad, please don't let them bring him out. And as the police officer got to us, I said the same thing to him. With his head down, he got to my door and I just looked at him. And he shook his head, like what I was picking up on was true. I knew what he was telling me. He didn't need to use words. I just looked at him with what would be crying, but without tears. It was like my body couldn't cry tears, but it was going through the motions. I asked him if I should have gone back in there. Would I have saved him? The pain, confusion, and fear I felt was something I will never truly be able to put into words. And I'm pretty good with words. He cut me off before I could say anything else and looked at me with fierce protection in his eyes. The fierceness of pain for me. He said with conviction in his voice, this was not your fault. This was the most selfish thing anyone could ever do. And he looked at my dad with sadness in his eyes and then back at me, as if maybe he had kids of his own. I don't know if he did. I know the following months I tried to reach out to him and I never got a call back. I was told by others in his line of work and from the coroner that he had had a hard time with that incident that day. There's a misconception that police officers aren't as human as the rest of us and are numb to things like this. And he said, contrary to what people think, that isn't true. This isn't something they normally see. Nothing about our story was normal. The police officer looked at me like him and I knew something no one else did. He saw what I saw. He started to tell me he cut Bob down the second he got in there and he was already cold. And that he did CPR until the EMTs got there. But that he was already gone. He started asking questions and I don't even remember what I told him, but I told him the story. It just fell out of my mouth. All of it. What had happened, how we got here, and at the same time, the bearded clipboard guy came up and he had more questions for me. And everyone wanted to know who else needed to be notified. And I said his mom, but my mind was blank. I couldn't remember Bob's brother's address or how to get a hold of her. The simplest things weren't even functioning in my brain. The police officer would step away from time to time to answer calls and get details. He explained how this was going to go now. That since when they arrived, Bob was already dead, it was now a crime scene and no one could go. No one could go in and no one could leave. And we needed to wait for the coroner The coroner was coming from Hood River, which meant he was over an hour away. My emotions were so shot, nothing at this point got me. Then my dad's phone rang. With my dad and the police officer standing at the car door next to me, my dad answered the phone and then handed it to me. It was my mom. I was shocked. What was happening? Did she know? I answered, and here were the tears. And she was crying too. What I didn't know was the second my dad got off the phone with me, he called my mom and said I had called saying I caught Bob attempting to kill himself. That is what he got from our jumbled conversation. He just happened to be driving back from Seattle and was an exit away when I called. Not a coincidence that he was right there when I needed him. He got off the phone with her, and as he pulled up, my youngest brother called randomly from college. He got a lovely earful as my dad rattled off the same thing to him and hung up abruptly as he pulled up to the house. So my mom was hearing this for the first time. I told her he was gone. Then my next question was where she was and where was Nash. Through tears, she said she was parked. Instantly, my focus went to him and what he was observing during all of this. And I asked how he was. She said he was sleeping. And she asked what to do. And I told her I just needed her to be strong for Nash. She swallowed her tears and her tone changed, and she said, okay. I told her I loved her and we got off the phone. More questions were asked and another car pulled up. It was Bob's mom. She got out of her car and walked to our gate. I looked at my dad and he went over to be with her. The police officer met her at the gate and told her. I watched from the car like my life was a horror movie. Another one of her kids had died. Bob's sister had died in a car accident when he was in middle school and she was 17 years old. I watched as my dad walked her back to his car, and as he went to talk to people to figure out what to do, he put her in the front seat with me. With Alvin jumping all over the car, we just sat there. We didn't say a word. Shock was an understatement. As more time passed, my dad was irritated with how long I was having to wait there. Eventually, he called it and just told them he was going to arrange for someone to come pick me and Bob's mom up. He said he would stay back and answer anything else they needed, and that I was done. About 15 minutes later, my mom's best friend pulled up, and she took us to my parents' house. The car ride was quiet. What do you even say? I walked back into my parents' house and could hear my mom and other people talking in the bar room off the living room. I walked in there to see my aunt and my mom talking quietly and Nash playing with a pile of paper straws on the floor. I just looked at my mom and aunt as they noticed me walk into the room, and I went straight for Nash. He kept playing, but I just wanted to be close to him. I was holding him so tight. I was so sad for him. The evening slowly went by before it was so late we all needed to go to bed. My dad eventually got back and we continued to talk about what had happened. But I was scared and I didn't want to be alone, and I was so wide awake. I guess running on adrenaline. I was dreading going to bed, and I think everyone else was looking forward to it, to put an end to that day and the exhaustion that had set in. Since I didn't have the capacity to do drawn-out nighttime routine, I practically just changed my clothes, got Nash ready for bed, and decided to have him sleep on me in my parents' room. I slept on the love seat in their room with Nash on my chest. I begged them to keep a light on so it wasn't dark. I just stared at the ceiling as everyone started snoring and drifting off to sleep. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep too. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night from someone calling my name, and it sounded like someone was whispering in my ear, but loudly. My eyes opened wide and quick to see it was pitch black in the room, and Nash was still sleeping soundly on my chest. I responded in a loud whisper, "Yeah?" And I heard nothing back. I waited for a minute, then a little louder. "Mom? Dad?" Still nothing. As I was coming to, I realized it was really still and quiet. No one was awake. Feeling just uneasy in general, I sat up with Nash and went over to my mom's side of the bed and woke her up. I asked if I could put Nash between them while I went to the bathroom. I just had to move. I had to shake off whatever had just happened. And when I came back into the room, I noticed they were all out solid. So I left Nash where he was and went back to the love seat I was sleeping on. I was wide awake now and confused on what woke me up. The last thing I wanted to do was scroll Instagram or do anything that would elicit any sort of emotion. So I thought, well, I'll go through my email junk mail. That's pretty emotionless, right? I grabbed my phone off the dresser and laid down and opened up my email inbox. And my stomach dropped again. At the very top of my unread inbox was an email from Bob. My brain was confused on what I was seeing. Was he alive? How did he send this? I kept blinking and staring and saw next the subject line, and it was left blank. And then I could see a couple sentence preview of the email. And it said, "Nash, you are strong." My stomach dropped even more. Was this the goodbye letter? Next, I looked at the time, and it was sent at 7:10 p.m., 30 minutes before I found him. I started to feel panic take over me, and I put the phone down. I was scared of anything that had to do with Bob, and the last thing I wanted was to read that letter alone in the dark. I felt claustrophobic in the room, so I walked over to my dad's side of the bed and nudged him awake. I told him Bob had emailed me a letter and I wanted him to look at it first. He sat up, half asleep, and with the glow of the phone lighting up his face, he started to read it out loud. I stopped him suddenly and said I didn't want to hear it yet until he read through it. By this point, my mom was waking up now and wanted to know what was going on. As my dad read it to himself, her and I both kept checking in with him. And he told us the letter was good, it wasn't scary, and asked if I wanted him to read it out loud now. So he did. He was right. It wasn't scary, but it was confusing. It was a letter to Nash, then a couple sentences to a few others, including me. Marlo. I love you, I love you, I love you. You will be stronger because I will help you spiritually. I'm sorry. And that was it. No explanation, nothing that explained any of this or made it any easier. My dad gave me my phone back and I laid back down. I read through the letter over and over again until my eyes eventually closed for who knows how long, before I was woken up by my parents starting to get up. It was barely light outside, but the energy of the room was that they were in action mode. The first day of this new life was starting now, and I had no idea where to begin. Thanks so much for being here. Please rate, like, share, and review so we can stay connected and continue this magical journey together.